Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Majurity Conversations 2025, the art and science of social impact. My name is Charlotte May, and I will be your host this morning. Now, in the next few hours, we will be exploring the world of impact measurement and how this relates to the work that you do. So to kick us off, please join me in welcoming the CEO of the Majurity Trust, Mr. Martin Tan.
Thank you, Charlotte. Good morning. Look at this lovely crowd. Just a very warm welcome to the Majurity Conversations 2025 and welcome to Foundry. How many of you are in Foundry for the first time? Okay, so please have a quick tour around later on. It's built as a social impact hub. This is one of those few events now where we can no longer complain to the venue that the venue has a problem. We now have to take it up everything on ourselves, but it's been a real exciting period trying to run this place in. And along the way, we'll share a little bit more about Foundry, but today is about the Majurity Conversation, people coming together. Every Majurity Conversation, we try to find a topic that's relevant for the time that we're in. So we have talked about what funders looked for, how do we best communicate impact. Today and this year, we're going to center our time on the art and science of social impact, or the art and science of social impact. We're going to take a deeper dive into impact measurement, and pardon the pun, it's impact. When a scientist reaches to the edge of what data can explain, they pause. When an artist finds technique insufficient, they surrender to intuition. For us at Majurity, we've discovered that lasting impact lives precisely at this intersection. For us, it's about the artist and the scientist. It is where measurement meets meaning and where metrics embrace stories. So a way of us looking at what we do at Majurity is to look at where evidence guides the way that we work and using data, using analytics, using our insights from what you have shared with us to be able to tell the story, to allow more resources to be flowing to the sector. So we are both the artists and the scientists, and our canvas is the community. Now, so for us, let's start with the scientist side of the house, measuring what matters. So over the last 1 year, and on your chairs, this is like fresh, hot, depressed. So this is our social impact report, or our what we call the Majurity Impact Report. Normally it's 2 documents. Normally is the annual report that is published June of each year, and then in April we publish a social impact report. Starting this year, what we're going to do is we're going to combine both documents together. So this is the executive summary. At the back of it, you have a QR code. You can actually go in and learn a little bit more about the various work that we're doing. And then along the way, we'll refer to those numbers. But just a couple of things for us as we start this morning. For us, 2024 has been a really exciting year. But since 2017, we've raised and unlocked about 60.7 million from donors, 550 donors that have provided us with this resource, 1/3 of it in 2024 alone. This has allowed us to be able to give the funds and the grants that many of you have received, but as well as building the space that we are now here, to unlock facilities, to unlock resources for the community as well. Through all of you in partnership, many of you here are grantee partners, which is great as part of the ecosystem. We've reached about 122,000 lives through the various grants that we have. And in 2024, we have 152 active grants that's on the ground, building out to what we want to build as thriving communities. But those are just numbers. What's one number that I got really, really excited about? Every year, many of you help us with our grantee partner survey. We ask a bunch of questions. 2024, last year, can I just say a big thank you? There was a higher response rate, so thank you for doing the survey. It helps us to know how good or how best we can do better and what are the things that you are interested in. But one number that captures our imagination is this, that over 80% of you describes our partnership as transformative. These are important numbers for us to know that we are on the right track to be able to do what we do. At the end of the day, science gives us coordinates on a map, but art helps us understand why that journey matters. It's beyond just what the numbers can say, it's what we can do with those numbers. So an example will be how we use the artist in us to illuminate the invisible, or really looking at the unseen and unmet needs. Scaffold Fund is a great example. It started during COVID. through donors coming together, and then we seeded, and we wanted to find out the aspirations of the migrant workers in our community. You'll remember in 2021, there was a lot of needs on the ground, and we started with this process in understanding what the public's perception of migrant workers are, what their living conditions, and what is our expectation. But last year, we started a whole new journey with research to understand about what are the defined needs, what is their aspiration as a whole. And then with the help of Macquarie, we have been able to expand that now, moving from this year to foreign domestic workers. But it's more than just a survey. It's the groups, the conversations that we have with the migrant brothers and sisters. And the one thing that we have learned is that it revealed a much deeper hunger when their time is here in Singapore. And a deeper hunger not just about better conditions, but about creating pathways to possibilities. So with that, it allows us to look at Scaffold Fund differently. How can we support charities and works and projects and initiatives that you are doing among the migrant worker space in a way that meet their needs and aspiration? Both between art and science, we can't do it on its own. We don't have the ability to just count on one. But how do we marry the two together? How do we therefore do it? We're really proud to have Dasra with us. A big round of applause for Neera and the team who has flown in from Mumbai. Kavneet and Panasha, thank you so much for flying all the way in. It has been a wonderful partnership. Last year, the team went to visit and spent a really good time. It was funny because at their meeting room, which almost is like Foundry, because they have a co-working space for the charities that support as well, we were sharing about our struggles. Like, as we were growing, these are the things that we were struggling with. And I still remember them laughing at us. And they were laughing at us for good reason. Yes, they were laughing with us. They were laughing because they say, Martin, you know, this was the exact same problem we had 7 years ago. And then since then, they grew from 70 to 200 people. So they're warning to us as a team to say, you know what, you have no idea what's coming. But it's been a great partnership. Majurity Conversation, as you know, is a gathering of sector leaders. Normally, our donors are invited as well, but given that we want to push Foundry as a space, we thought that, you know what, we'll just bring sector leaders together. Tomorrow morning, we will have our donors coming together to spend time with Dasra's team. And then tomorrow afternoon, the Majurity Trust have a session just to learn a little bit more. So this is going to be 2 days worth of activity together with Dasra. And I'm really happy for that. And we're also really excited to have our panel speakers with us. So a big round of applause for our panel speakers. Larry, Ij, Shao, and the rest. So thank you so much for making time for us. Oops, let me just go back one. We're really excited also to talk about our partnership with Bloomberg. Bloomberg has been a real supporter for Majurity Trust for a couple of years now, and we've gotten to know the team. And it's actually through Bloomberg that we got to know Dasra. And I love how this thing come together as a circle. So to move from learning to piloting and being resourced to do impact measurement meaningfully in our organization, what we are doing is a partnership with Bloomberg of something that they have done together with Dasra in India. Now we're going to bring it to Singapore. So I'm really excited to share about this signature event, flagship event called D4GX. So here to share more about D4GX is Vandana, Regional Head of Corporate Philanthropy from Bloomberg, to share a little bit more. Over to you.
Martin. Well, how does it move?
Just this one.
This one, okay. All right. Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Martin, for that. It's so wonderful to see so many familiar faces and new faces. Hi, Natalie. My gosh, it's wonderful to be here. I'm Vandana Ramchandani, as you can see in bold. Maybe we move on from that slide. A bit intimidating. But anyway, many of you may or may not know Mike Bloomberg has committed a vast majority of our profits from Bloomberg LP to Bloomberg Philanthropies. And Bloomberg Philanthropies encompasses Mike's foundations, his personal and his corporate giving. Bloomberg Philanthropies now invests in 700 cities across 150 countries. And Mike has given away over $21 billion over his lifetime. So as you can imagine, philanthropy is very close to our hearts. and is actually the core of our culture at Bloomberg. And we truly believe that profit and principles are not mutually exclusive, and they actually reinforce each other. Mike built Bloomberg LP, which is a global information and financial provider, providing data to bring transparency and fairness and efficiency to the global markets, right? So data is core to us, right? We truly believe that if you can face the data, if you can understand it, you can really leverage it, right? And similarly, we feel the same way in the philanthropic sector. In fact, we have taken all our learnings from our business and invested them into our philanthropic giving. So again, very similarly or equally believe that if you embrace data in the social sector, you can actually unlock opportunities and really drive progress towards some of society's largest challenges that we are facing today. So with that, this is a very momentous year for us in Singapore, right? We are celebrating our nation's 60th anniversary. It's a young nation. Bloomberg has been in Singapore for 35 years, so it's a big moment for us as well. And so we're really, really thrilled to partner with the Majurity Trust, and I see Lisa, Talent Trust, to launch Data for Good Exchange, or in short, D4GX Singapore. So what will D4GX be? D4GX is a Bloomberg initiative that we hope will aspire and inspire organizations to actually leverage data to supercharge the social sector. We hope that charities across Singapore will educate themselves, will be empowered, will be able to elevate themselves, leveraging data to strengthen their operations, to maximize impact, to tell the communication story, as Martin said, because it is data that can help with both the art and the science. It starts with science, and it lends itself so beautifully to the art, right? This will build upon the government initiatives that already exist. I mean, I am sure MCCY and Zul and Lynette are somewhere in the audience. And so we feel that we can bring the data expertise that Bloomberg has and can continue to support the ever-growing charity support structure, right? That is continuing to evolve in Singapore as we try to build a philanthropic hub for the region here, right? Moving along to the next slide. So what is Data for Good Exchange? So as I said, we're looking not for data experts, we're really looking for organizations that are motivated to learn and improve, right? We just want you to be motivated, to embrace data, to be committed. And what will it be? Any registered charity in Singapore can apply, right? We are looking for as many of you as possible to be a part of this journey with us. We will, with Majurity Trust and Talent Trust, select 60 charities to join us on 11th of June for a summit. This summit will bring together data experts, industry leaders, government partners to share insights, thought leadership, but also hands-on learning workshops to actually embed the data. And then this cohort can then apply for a D4GX grant and accelerator program. 6 charities will be selected for $60,000 each and will also get 3 months of accelerator mentorship in partnership with Talent Trust, with mentors from Bloomberg, but also from our client partners, because we understand that just having a vision is not enough. Actually embedding the learning and having some hands-on exchange is very important, right? Moving on to the next slide. What does this, so, this is what we would love for all of you to do and spread the word. Please visit our website. This is obviously our QR code. Submit a D4GX cohort application. The last date is May 7th. And then if you're selected, you'll attend the D4GX summit. And of course, most importantly, even if you're not selected, everybody that applies will be a part of a data community. We want to embed a learning journey. So we want to have multiple learning events as we curate a data community, because it's not only about these 60 organizations, it's about systemic change. So we can leverage the science of data and really create impact together. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you so much, Wanda. Isn't that exciting? Can I highly recommend that you all sign up as soon as you can after these messages? No, as soon as you can throughout today. So that's the second. Last but not least, I know time is running out for me. It's our partnership with Charity Council and Charities Unit. Just last week at a dialogue with COC, you have heard of us announcing our program as part of the development roadmap. So all the things that we're now doing, we're now moving upstream to provide now charities for training when it comes to social impact measurements for boards and senior leadership. So this is called the Social Impact Essentials that we built in partnership with Charities Unit. This is made available to the sector as a whole. Typically for Majurity Trust, we do something within the Majurity Trust ecosystem, so we make it available to you as grantee partners first. But as we are working with COC side, we want to make it open to the sector as a whole. So those are the key programs. I won't go too much into it. You can find out a little bit more with the team. But what I want to say is there's a 1.5 days training. We're going to pilot in August. But what is really, really good is that it's 80% funded if you're eligible under the NCSS CFT fund. So 80% funded. And then if you are a Majurity Trust grantee partner, that means you are already within our ecosystem, you get a 10% discount. All right? So remember, please, check in with the team. Cheryl is here. Shanya and Hui Xian are around, so please feel free to check in with them. So, the art and science of social impact. Let me end with this. Give me just 2 more minutes and I'll close. When we think about impact, we think about the work that we do as Majurity. We try as best as we can, and many of you have been with us for many years, to use data to guide what we are doing, informed by the insights you give us on the ground. But beyond just the numbers, impact measurement isn't just that dollar sign that we raise or the number that we reach. It's the stories that come with it. Foundry is a great example. One of the conversations recently is that one charity came up to us and said, hey, can you tell us how your experience in building Foundry? I said, sure. We shared a little bit, the pain, how we lost my hair, how we almost died. And so I said, why are you asking? Over breakfast, they said that, you know what, we have another building and we're actually thinking of building a social impact hub for women entrepreneurs because that's our main thing. And we feel that it's possible. Some impact are immeasurable for us. The ability to have partners look at what Foundry is and say, hey, I can do that too. That allows us to build a far greater ecosystem together. It's not just what Majurity Trust can do, it's about what you can do, what we can partner, and how we can share information, share data, share insights, share stories, and share inspiration. Because only through that the sector becomes better. When we're there for each other, we journey with each other. Yesterday has a big news that swamped all of us, and I'll end with His Holiness. And I think it impacts us in different ways. For those of you who are Catholics, it impacts a lot more. I'm not a Catholic myself. I grew up in a Catholic environment in the Catholic school. So it's a major news for me. As one of the heroes of mine. I had the privilege of attending his state lecture when he was here last year. And this was what he said, and this was my tribute and my Facebook post last night. It is important that Singapore has not only prospered economically, but it has also striven to build a society in which social justice and the common good are held in high regard. And that was what he said. I'm thankful that His Holiness' view of Singapore is that he sees beyond the buildings, but he sees a people who hold in high regard social justice and common good. There are many ways that we can pay tribute to the man in terms of our posts and our lives. But maybe, just maybe, what we do in this room, the relationship we have, the work that you do as grantee partners, is probably the best tribute to the man whom we call a hero in this space. A man who fights for social justice, a man who fights for common good. And the best thing that we can do in memory of him is to continue the good work that you are doing. We have been thinking it's such a big news for us in this space. How do we pay a tribute? I think this is probably the best thing. that we keep doing what we are doing. You keep doing what you're doing, and we'll be here to support as best as we can. It's going to be an exciting day of breakouts and panels, so I hope you participate, ask questions, ask difficult questions, because you know why? I'm not speaking and I'm not moderating. So please enjoy the rest of the day. Charlotte, back to you.
Thank you very much, Martin, and thank you for reminding us of the work that each of us can do. And next, we would like to welcome our keynote speaker for the Majurity Conversations. Neera Nundy is a co-founder and partner at Dasra, and she'll be sharing insights on reimagining impact measurement. But please, I'd like to turn your attention to the screens first. Thank you.
Progress isn't one big leap. It's countless small steps, persistent and purposeful, that build lasting change. Across India, changemakers work tirelessly to create impact. But the road to social change isn't easy. It's multifaceted. Communities hold the knowledge and solutions to their challenges, yet their voices often go unheard. Non-profits dedicate themselves to solving critical problems, but face barriers, whether it's accessing funding, building capabilities, measuring impact, or scaling strategically. Funders, too, seek clarity. They face the challenge of identifying the most impactful initiatives while navigating an overwhelming array of needs like effective resource allocation, robust data, trusted partnerships, and clear metrics for success. Although each of them brings unique strengths, true social impact happens when all stakeholders work hand in hand, building stronger bridges. This is where Dasra plays a role. For 25 years, Dasra has been a systems orchestrator, uniting diverse stakeholders and strengthening grassroots organizations. Through capacity building, leadership development, and mentorship. We've also enabled a philanthropy infrastructure that not only supports the ecosystem, but actively facilitates change and directs resources where they are needed the most through funder education and advisory. To strengthen this social structure, we need to go beyond collaboration. We must reshape systems and influence policies that reflect the realities of those on the ground. At Dasra, we have influenced policy narratives needed for real, systemic impact. Using data and technology, we constantly reimagine these social narratives. In 25 years, Dasra has supported 1,400 nonprofits, influenced 800 givers to unlock $420 million, shaped 70 policies, and impacted 200 million lives. As India approaches 100 years of independence, we see a future where every voice is heard, every effort is aligned, and every person thrives with equity and dignity. Let's build a transformed India together.
Everyone, please welcome Neera Nundy.
Thank you. Wow, what a welcome, and it's so wonderful. Good morning to see all of you. It is also a bit nerve-wracking to be called the keynote address, to be honest, and to be a podium that's a lot taller than I am. So let's see how this goes. Well, thank you for having me. Thank you, Martin, Charles, and the team for being so welcoming of us. Despite my accent, which is Canadian, I'm more proud to be Canadian, often confused with being American. So I thought, let me clarify for you. But I have been living in India now for about more than 25 years, really trying to shape the sector with a team of over 200 people. But I was tasked with speaking to you about impact measurement. I must disclose, by no stretch of the imagination am I an impact expert, and often these impact measurement conversations can be very serious. So we're not going to be very serious, but we're going to be a little bit serious. And because I was tasked with keynote address, I thought I'd like to leave you sort of with a few nuggets. So even while you're trying to revive yourself with coffee and listening to my slightly monotonic voice and sometimes squeaky, I want you to just leave with a couple of nuggets. So the whole idea is to try to reimagine impact measurement because it can be actually quite boring. And a lot of folks who do impact measurement, I think, take themselves very seriously. So let's not take ourselves very seriously, but it is a serious matter. So how we measure impact really shapes how we design it, how we communicate, how we scale it. And really at Dasra, we believe that impact measurement shouldn't just be a tool for accountability, but it should be an instrument for learning, equity, and trust building. And so in a world driven by data, we often find ourselves pulled towards what's measurable. I put all these numbers up, as did Martin, which is things that we can count, right? And what can obviously feels like it's immediate. Yet we know, all of you working in the social impact space, it's really about the changes in people's lives, the dignity restored, the agencies that we've built, the trust that we've earned. And to be honest, you can't actually capture that in a spreadsheet. And so at Dasra, over the last 26 years, it's really taught us that measurement has to really go beyond the accountability, but it has to go to learning. And it should deepen trust and at its core, center the communities we serve. And so today I want to discuss the future of impact measurement, but I really want you to try to reimagine it. And with that reimagination, I've put up here sort of the 4 methods, approaches that have typically been used at Dasra, or typically used in the sector. We all look at the quantitative methods, the qualitative methods, but I really want you to focus a bit more on the participatory methods as well as field building. And so if you think about these 4 areas, we've traditionally done quantitative, we've now moved to, we meaning all of us as sector, moved to try to story tell, but the participatory methods and the field building is really what's going to be transformative for the sector. And I wanted to leave you with a few examples that Dasra has done in this space so that comes alive. And so the 3 essential shifts we need to be making so that we can reimagine this impact. I'm going to go through 3 case studies. One is really going from metrics to meaning. Another is really going from rigid frameworks to more adaptive learning. And the last one is going from data collection to sort of data empowerment. And so let me go to the next slide. Similar to, I guess, your scaffolding fund that the Majurity Trust launched, really on the back of COVID, we launched a Rebuild India Fund. This came from a few issues that the country was facing. Not only COVID was the issue, but we had a lot of regulatory changes in India that didn't allow for funding to go really quite deep into the grassroots. And so with that change in regulatory environment, we said, is there a way to be able to support grassroots organizations with flexible funding? And so we launched a $50 million fund to really support proximate leaders from the grassroots community themselves who are running smaller organizations with flexible funding. So you get 5 years of $10,000 to be able to really strengthen your organization and try and institutionalize. And so with this participatory approach of not just investing in these proximate leaders, we really shaped sort of the monitoring and evaluation system. The traditional, we did sort of the baseline and the end line, but I think what it was rooted in was that we co-created the metrics. We ended up actually really pushing for regional languages, and we really brought the community in through these organizations to kind of shape what this would look like. And you'll see here that the focus of the fund is very much on, are these organizations growing institutionally, and what does that mean? And trying to bring meaning to how the communities are defining success. And so just to take that nugget, really move from metrics to meaning and placing community at the center is really the Rebuild Fund's example. Then I'll move to our next collaborative, which DAC is the Dasra Adolescents Collaborative. We have a large population in India, of which a majority is actually moving towards a demographic dividend, we hope. And so with over 250 million adolescent girls, we really shaped this collaborative called Dasra Adolescents Collaborative. It's almost been there for about 10 years. So just take note, collaboratives, as you shape these funds or field building, you really gain traction in year 8 to year 10. So it's very much a long-term game. But what I wanted to bring out for you here, the power of the Adolescents Collaborative was really focusing on these 4 metrics. bringing people together, different kinds of stakeholders, but really anchoring the change for girls who are 10 to 19 based on research, the experience of the community, the priorities of the government, priorities of funding as well. We really anchored and agreed that these were the 4 outcomes that we would like to achieve as a collaborative. And each will contribute in different ways, but that would be the North Star, 4 stars in some ways. One is to help girls finish grade 10. 1 in 100 girls actually finish grade 12. So just being able to complete education was a priority. Delaying age of marriage and delaying first pregnancy really supports maternal health, as well as keeping girls safe, and they're all actually interrelated. And finally, employability and agency. It's great if you educate a girl, but if she has no livelihood to be able to contribute to the household or agency, there's really no point to any of that. And we really focused our work in a particular state, and we really anchored it around these themes. So what I wanted to leave you here with is that often the rigid frameworks, so yes, we know USAID no longer exists, but one of their legacy, which we're not so happy about, was their log frames, right? Which was like inputs, outputs, outcomes. And we all somehow pivoted to really think like that. And so it's to move from the rigidity of a framework like that much more to adaptive learning. So I want to leave you with this. Think about it in circles. Think about it in an iteration. It's a learning process. For us, the Adolescence Collaborative was a learning process around the process. So sometimes you think about the outcome, but there can be things that you do as an organization or as a funder that actually really create change. So being able to measure and bring rigor to process evaluation is also part of how learning can be transformed. So the final case study that I want to leave you with, and how exciting that we've announced the Data for Good exchange here in Singapore, how much our team really loved working with Bloomberg, but I have to appreciate Vandana's openness to really move from data collection to data empowerment. And so as you embark on this Data for Good journey, what we really saw was, are the most vulnerable being represented in this data? And really, the ultimate goal of this impact measurement and where data is being collected from, who is it being measured for? And if we could really push for the community to be measuring it for themselves, for women to be able to embrace, I have this knowledge, what can I do with this knowledge? When I see this data, I wish we could transform the lives of my daughters, and I'd like to claim this data to really ask for change in policy. So just to push the envelope with today's technology, with mobile access, we really thought that the Data for Good exchange was around building the capacity of community and organizations to bring data empowerment rather than data collection. And so a lot of the challenge grants and the mentoring that we did do with our community was to build that capacity. So I really wanted to urge you to move towards data empowerment for as we think about impact assessment. And we really started looking at what's the first mile solution. You know how people say last mile. We said, what's the first mile, which is the first mile closest to the community that you're really trying to see the impact move on? How do we have more feedback loops there? How do we have participatory scorecards, platforms that are really bringing real-time data towards that policy? And a lot of this is platform building. So building these platforms actually helps us engage with the government. In India, you cannot move the needle, you cannot have an impact without engaging and partnering with the government. And so really bringing alive some of that data in a non-controversial way is important. So as you embark on your impact measurement, bring the government as a partner, because we can't make them look bad after all, but you also want to show them where these gaps are and where you need services and policies to be able to go. So finally, I wanted to leave you with learnings from what we've learned over a number of years and powerful lessons sort of in this MEL landscape. So one is participatory evaluation. It's not just ethical, but it'll actually lead to better outcomes. Finally, expand. Think about platforms, field building, systems level evaluation, because that's really how you'll understand catalytic change. And finally, like I said, look and aspire for partnership with the government despite its challenges. It'll really help us move towards localizing, but it'll really help us facilitate finding shared impact indicators. And so, what does the future look like? Well, here in Singapore, I know you all are pioneering a number of different shifts, collaborative MEL, probably adaptive grant making. But what I want to leave you with, which was my first slide, is look for how you can blend the qualitative with the quantitative. That is, in essence, what makes it both an art and a science. Also, prioritize embedding it in the community, and especially their voice at every stage of measurement as you're going through to really push towards learning. And finally, I want to leave you with impact measurement shouldn't just be about looking back. And today's time, with so much data, AI, insights, and analysis, you can really use this to help us look forward and predict how we can address some of the challenges that are faced there. So I want to leave you with a few questions. Let me start. What if we viewed measurement as an act of respect? What if we saw it as a commitment to learning, not just accountability? What if we made space, not just for numbers, but for the narratives, the stories, for nuance, and for the complexity of change? If we do that, we won't just measure impact, we'll reimagine it for greater impact for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Neera, for sharing those case studies and your wisdom. Next, we will be moving on to the first panel discussion. So while the team sets up the chairs, I will introduce our speakers. Now, this next segment is on rethinking impact. And please join me in welcoming our panelists. First, we have Dr. Justin Lee, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute of Policy Studies. Please also join me to welcome Vandana Ramchandani, Regional Head of Corporate Philanthropy Asia Pacific at Bloomberg. And of course, joining them is Neera Nundy, co-founder and partner at Dasra. And moderating this session will be Charles Tan, Senior Director of Philanthropy at the Majurity Trust.
Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you so much. And good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing this morning? Good. Oh, no. Let's try that again. Let's roll out more coffee. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. It's wonderful to be among friends and partners. And please join me in warmly welcoming again our panelists for today, this first panel. We have Vanda from Bloomberg, Justin from Institute of Policy Studies, and Neera, welcome again. And first, Neera, thank you for that thought-provoking keynote. You know, what a opening. And you've really set a compelling foundation for this conversation we're about to have. Right, over the next 40 minutes, we're going to explore and continue this discussion about the art and science of social impact and impact measurement, digging deeper into the whys, but not just the whys, but the hows, right? Practical handles, tools, you know, not the concepts and the frameworks, but really how do we take action together as a community. I know it's still early in the morning. Some of us have had our coffee already, but I thought we'll start with a little audience participation just to get the ball rolling. We're going to have a Q&A section where we have the audience members share your questions, what's burning in your minds as you think about this whole question about impact measurement. But let me just kick off with a few questions for the audience, right? One, how many of us in the room joined the sector because you wanted and you're committed to make a positive impact to the community? Please raise your hands. Wow, like very contrived. Or those who never raise. No, that's kidding. And how many feel that your organization is making a positive impact? Raise the other hand. By now, you should have both hands up in the air. The last question is, in your definition of impact, how many of you feel that you are very aligned with your funders and your stakeholders in the way you think about your organization's impact and how your stakeholders think about impact? If you're very aligned, can you wave your hands at me? Oh no, we have lots of work to do. So I hope we can wrestle with a few questions today as we kick off this panel. I think one is, who gets to define impact? How can we ensure the voice of those we serve, people and communities? How can we meaningfully shape, how can they meaningfully shape how we understand success? And two, what are the current challenges in measuring impact? Is there space, as Neera shared in the keynote, for more balanced, grounded, perhaps fit-for-purpose approaches? And the last, this term, and reflecting on this term, MEL, monitoring, evaluation, and learning. As it becomes more widely adopted, how can we shift the emphasis from just tracking and reporting, just from accountability, but really learning as the core outcome and objective of any impact framework that we approach? So with that, I'd now like to invite the panelists to share their thoughts on the topic. And I thought I'll kick off with, perhaps Vandana first, and then we will go around the panelists.
Okay. I thought everybody's heard too much from me already, so looking at Justin. But hi again, everybody. I think, I think a lot of this has already been covered, but it is really the art and science, right? So while I think measurement is important for understanding impact, it is not sufficient in itself. Just measurement of numbers doesn't tell the story. And so it's really, the sector we're in needs an emotional connect. That is really the way that you're actually going to open the purse strings, right? I mean, data, yes, a lot of organizations, funders want the data because, there's reporting that they need to do, perhaps, etc. But what's really going to open the purse strings? It's going to be the stories. It's that compelling conversation that you can have. So I think I want to talk a little bit more about the art versus just the science. So leverage the data, and that's the way we look at it, but bring it to life with the stories. Use the data to be able to tell the compelling story. And most importantly, I think something that Neera also mentioned is it's not measurement for the sake of measurement, right? Mike always says, what you can't measure, you cannot manage. And what is really managing? It's managing the process, it's improving the process, it's constant learning. Maybe you miss something and you want to do things differently. So I think it's that journey that data can help you with, or measurement can help you with.
Thank you, Vandana. Neera?
Oh, I'm next. Gosh, must be tired of listening to me. So I actually think, is it double? Oh, I don't need this. Yes. So I actually think a lot of this impact measurement, and Vandana's the few enlightened funders, I must say, the challenge is the funding and the funder. The funder is ultimately the problem in terms of who we feel in the sector accountable to. And so changing who one is accountable to is actually the first mindset change you need to do as you're kind of moving into the impact measurement space. And therefore bringing different players together and agreeing on what you will be accountable towards, I think can make this shift towards really looking at impact measurement as a learning aspect. I think agreeing that you are taking a risk. So philanthropy is supposed to be the most risk-taking kind of capital. And so if you really think what you set out to do is exactly what you're going to achieve, then are you really taking the risk? So I think coming together and agreeing on how the change is, the timeline, what you agree you might be able to measure, plus storytell, I think is a good place to start an open and honest conversation and bring funders into the learning. I really believe that if you're in it for the impact with the community, then to be able to share your challenges with different stakeholders and feeling like you're collectively engaged in trying to achieve that is important. Because behind a funder are people. The program officers, the folks who are representing the money are individuals. And so they too can be engaged in, in that change. I also, as much as it is an art, I don't want to take away the value of measurement. Like, you still need to invest in being able to measure. The numbers makes a big difference. I also have to admit that as Dasra, for us, the journey took a while to really realize, what are we in this for? And we went through, like, we're in it for impact. Yes, we are in it to change lives. Hoping that people see us as an organization that's there for the grassroots, for the communities. But, you know, to be honest, our value is to unlock funding for the sector. And that is one measurable number. So to stay true to how much money is moving, philanthropic money is moving, and to not shy away and feel that somehow that takes away from the impact, I think was an important realization. And to be honest, I think this only came to us probably in the last, 10 years.
But that is impact, isn't it? I mean, getting more funding for the sector. I wanted to add on actually one thing which I thought was so pertinent, right? Who are we accountable for ultimately? So let's not lose sight of that. Yes, the funder is important because unlocking funding. But like you said, right, it's the ultimately, what are we here for? I mean, many of you raised your hands why you got into this sector, right? It is to create that social change. And so if you're not accountable to that, and I loved how you said bring the funder in and there's a person behind it, which is why I was talking about the stories. A lot of funders want to be involved. I think we just assume that you're the grantor, and we're the grantee partner, and like, you're the funder, and we kind of keep you. But a lot of, at least for us, we want to be a part of the journey. We want to be a part of the process. We want to have input. And if something doesn't work, it's catalytic capital, right?
Yep.
I mean, let's leverage it as that.
Yeah, great point about what's our ultimate line of sight and where that line of accountability comes in as well. And I think those are topics and themes that we can deep dive a bit more. But Justin, over to you.
Sometimes we take money from funders and they give me a lot of grief and pain because sometimes they treat you as a vendor, not as a partner. But we've done a lot of impact measurements, and I think the first thing to acknowledge is that it's very attractive and useful to the funders because, especially the big funders, you invest in multiple causes, in different types of solutions across different types of NGOs. And so you need something to simplify your analysis of whether it made a difference. The only question is, of course, evaluation is great, but the stakes are really high, right? It's not just for learning, as you put it. The stakes are really high for the grantees because it is performance benchmarking, and it feeds into resource allocation decisions. So of course the stakes are high. Yeah, you can tell your kids, tests never mind, exams never mind. Everybody knows the school is a sorting system, so everybody cares about the tests in that way. So when does evaluation, in my perspective, when is it too much of a good thing? It can be a tool for good, but there are two ways in which it can be somewhat problematic, right? It can be useful simplification for you to make decisions, or it can be problematic oversimplification. So if you use analogy, like if you use fitness, how do you tell whether somebody is fit or not? If you reduce it to one metric, so you talk about measuring impact, right? But the first thing to figure out is what counts as success or what counts as useful, meaningful impact. So if you just use fitness as an analogy, right? Let's say I think strength. Strength is the most important measure of fitness. Then the weightlifter would be more fit than the sprinter, or should speed be the most important metric? They say, of course, we don't use single metrics. Actually, we do all the time. GDP is so upfront, and everybody falls on certain favorite metrics. But then you say, okay, you're very clever. We will use a composite index. We will use all sorts of things and put it together so that we measure. Fine, there is a composite index for fitness. So you can measure strength, you can measure speed, you can measure endurance. The problem with composite indexes, again, is that sometimes it doesn't capture context-dependent, useful information. If you were going to buy and set up a soccer team, you're not going to buy the players that are the most fit in terms of how strong they are, how fast they run, or how much upper body strength, lower body strength they have. You're going to buy the soccer players based on whether they dribble or they pass well or they shoot well. And so there's no perfect composite index. And so all these things like quality of life, some youth development index, all these things, right, they are closer to this kind of general index rather than something that's context specific. So that's kind of where I see these things. It can be too much of a good thing if you rely too much on them.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on what you just shared, Justin. And you've worked alongside with many charities to guide their impact measurement approach. And you spoke a little earlier about some of the challenges that they face, right? But we'll flip the conversation. Say you were speaking to funders and grant makers, right? You talked about composite versus very specific metrics, no one size fit all, and so on. But if you're advising a funder or a grant maker, actually, what would be your recommendation to shape how they should be approaching this whole question about impact measurement? Because surely there's a need for accountability, right? But how do you get that balance, or if a balance is even possible in as we think about impact measurement?
The first thing I would say is focus on defining what counts as success, and like all these guys are doing, right? Defining it with your community. So there's something before evaluation proper. It's called values inquiry. Evaluation proper is just taking the criteria you have and rigorously scientifically measuring it and comparing it and then making judgments about whether this or that made an impact. But values inquiry is saying what criteria should even be in consideration. So that's before evaluation proper, which is kind of interesting, and actually nobody wants to do that work. Even in the evaluation field, the evaluators don't want to do this work because they rather ask the funder, what matters to you? And then the funders will give it to them, and they will rigorously measure a project or program based on those criteria. But when you do values inquiry, it's the murky space. It's not just art. It's morality, it's values at play. Different people have different values. And even if you ask the community, they might share different values, they might disagree with one another. Then what? So there's this problem of you either do descriptive kind of values inquiry, or you start doing applied ethics and start prescribing criteria that you think makes more sense. And that's the part that nobody wants to do, because they all want to pretend that they're scientists, right? Scientists do value neutral assessment and analysis, but actually the foundation of all rigorous evaluation is this bedrock of values that nobody. So the easiest thing is funder tell the scientists what is our values, what matters to you, what criteria matters to you, then we'll do it. Yeah. But there are people who are starting to do that. So I think that would be the first thing to do is what matters to you.
Thanks, Justin. So, we talked a lot about the common good, and maybe that definition of what the common good looks like might differ as well, right? It's not maybe as intuitive as one might seem it is. And Neera was sharing that Bloomberg and Vanna's team is an enlightened funder, and here I have to fully agree. Not because they are a funder, full disclosure. But Vanna, I think one of the dynamics and trends we are seeing is that companies and corporates are getting a lot more engaged with philanthropy, which is a great thing. And one of the concerns that they have is how do they articulate and then aggregate and articulate that social impact, right? So they support many different social impact initiatives. And I think while that focus is sharpening and is good, sometimes it inadvertently leads to a bit of extra reporting burden on the grantee partners. Do you see this happening, among your corporate peers? And how can corporates think about aggregating impact without instituting more complex and perhaps unnecessary reporting requirements?
Yeah, I think certainly, right, because a lot of the corporates are beholden to boards and have their own, measures that they need to report on. And it's really too, I think, as everybody has said, particularly Neera, it's about unlocking the funding, right? So, take that with a pinch of salt. I think the way we can influence it, because I think that's our role, being in the sector, and I associate with the sector because I feel I'm very privileged to come from an organization where a vast majority of our profits go to philanthropy, right? So it's such a big part of who we are, or it's a different mindset. But I think we have the opportunity, I say quite loosely, as in us being a corporate and a family foundation, but also yourselves in the social sector, right? A lot of these corporates are also on a journey of learning. So what role can you play? Just assuming and accepting is perhaps not the, you're almost accepting the burden, right? So I think I would encourage you to question and share. I think ultimately, all corporates want to do the right thing. They are in this because they want to do the right thing. Nobody's putting pressure. In India, we have the CSR rule of 2%, right? In Singapore, we don't. So corporates are really coming to the table because they want to do good, right? And as Neera said, there is a human behind that number that they're trying to track. So I would say build a partnership and actually put the beneficiary at the heart of it and talk about the impact that you're going to create for the beneficiary and then work backwards. And if you are already doing, and we say this very often to our grantee partners, if you're already doing certain measures for your own impact report or for certain other funders, just share that with us. Sometimes our terminology might just be different, right? And we can actually just align with your terminology or say, all right, just give us that data set and we'll make it work, right? So I think it is that partnership and that influence and that voice that is needed in the social sector, rather than being order takers, to really believe that you have a seat at the table. And I think, in Singapore, where we are today, I do believe that each of us has a seat at the table.
Thanks, Vanda. Neera, I have a couple of questions for you, but I thought before that, maybe we can flash the code to the Mentimeter, because I'm sure audience members would have questions to ask as well. But as we all of you put in your questions into Mentimeter, Neera, I wanted to follow on some of the themes you shared in your keynote and in the opening of this panel. And you talked about really learning as the central outcome of this whole exercise about impact measurement. We do see that paradigm shift and that framework of what we're trying to do and aggregating data and so on is very much in that direction. But how do you promote this value of learning, right? I guess it goes both ways. With fellow funders, how do you shift from just beyond accountability to that learning mindset? Can you give us some good best practices or what you see that's happening that you feel is in the right track? But at the same time, how do you help your grantee partners and your partners, your charity, many charity partners also think differently about MEL, right? Because perhaps they are already quite used to a frame of thinking, conditioned to some degree by maybe past practices and existing practices. How do you actually shift that conversation with your network?
So I guess the focus to move it towards learning is to not take away from the M and the E, although they're just not great words, right? They have a certain power dynamic, right, in the monitoring word, right, in the evaluation word. So I think to take away that power from it, first of all. And so also to begin to change the mindset of who is monitoring. So like in India, we have class monitors. I don't know if you have those here, right?
Yes, we do.
And like you all walk around and you're like, oh, we're so cool, we're the class monitors. So monitoring has a policing element of sorts, right, to it. Evaluation also has a certain feel. When you bring that third party, it's almost like they're coming in to look for things that are not working. So I think bring in the right partner for the M and the E, and to take away a little bit is why I emphasize that this learning needs to be part of the monitoring and sort of part of the evaluation. I think the second thing is all of this stuff costs money. And so it's great, funders want you to monitor and evaluate, but are they actually paying for the cost of attribution? So we haven't actually talked about this whole attribution contribution, right? This MEL degenerates into a conversation between what is attributable and what is the contribution. It absolutely has to be about contribution. We overspend on attribution. I mean, we have supported an organization called Educate Girls. Please look it up. When it first started, they are heralded with their social impact bond. They must have spent a fortune on getting that social impact, development impact bond, off the ground. The amount of resources, expertise that comes into being able to do the measurement with what worked for Educate Girls, you take a step back and you ask yourself, is it worth it? And absolutely, I think for Educate Girls, it was absolutely worth it. The leverage that came from being able to showcase the difference that they were being able to make, I think is important for us to reflect on. But that case study, could you take things that were spent there to be able to shape, the sector around education, adolescent girls. I think that needs learning platforms that exist, and funders should encourage that. And I guess my last point with this whole measurement piece is we sort of picked up the strange clinical trials, random control trials, and somehow brought it to the sector, which again is absurd. But I think from it is to take away, we are searching for a connection of one thing to ultimately be that impact, and it's not linear. Which then brings me to my last point, which is we need to think, maybe not composite, but I do think there is value in aggregating. Because the evaluation piece is all around what you did well or what you didn't do well, when we brought our partners together for our Adolescent Girls Collaborative, what they were most excited about in the process of designing the evaluation was that you will get an aggregate view. So you're not going to be able to say this organization actually didn't do that well or this one actually did. So no one was like elbowing each other to try to be like, right, we're the great ones in this that made the biggest difference in the community. So thinking through aggregation, thinking through those platforms, I think is an important part of solving some of this MEL challenge. And I would push us all, as well as funders, collaborate. See, funders they force that one-to-one. But imagine if funders came together and said, we're going to pool money, which we forced them to do for the Adolescents Collaborative. We said a certain percentage of your funding has to come into aggregating the monitoring and evaluation, and so you get one report. You get one report. Now that's the dream. I'd be lying to say we had one report, but we still had to report separately to all of them. But for hygiene factor, you got to have some basic things. But yeah, so push on aggregate view and aggregate investment.
Thank you, Neera. I'm just looking through the questions from the audience, and maybe if I can stay with Neera, because I think this is a topic that we spoke about also. And the question goes, there's a big shift towards trust-based philanthropy, where outcome-output measurement is less important to funding decisions. How do you feel this is an overall positive move? What are the risks? So it's a really interesting way of framing that trust-based philanthropy question.
I think everybody has their own definition of what this trust-based philanthropy is. I don't think trust-based is like, let's blindly fund. I think trust-based is around the flexibility piece and the learning piece. So I think the trust comes from the ability to be able to come together and say, actually, it's not working, and so can we change, right? And can we modify and can we iterate? I think trust-based comes from the fact that this is a long game. Yeah. So I might give you my funding now, but by the time we're actually going to see change, it's going to be 3 to 5 years, and we entrust you to spend it how you want to spend it. The power of trust-based philanthropy is in flexibility. The problem now is you want to fund programs only, so you're not funding salaries, so you're not really building institutions, so you don't have any M&E systems. So I think really trusting the organization to be able to spend how they would like and be able to achieve that impact, I think is the cornerstone of trust-based philanthropy.
I like how you frame it as, at the end of the day, trust-based is about being flexible and I guess being responsive to the needs of the organizations. There's so many questions. I've a lot to go through and try to pull them together. But this one is for Justin. And the question goes, from your experience working in charities, what metrics are perhaps most impactful to measure for smaller charities? And here I'm being a bit biased because, as you know, Majurity Trust has a special heart for working with startup and early stage non-profits, right? And I think this question pertains a lot to perhaps also as they navigate this season of growing and dealing with starting to deal with different funders and grant makers, what comes to mind?
What metrics are the best? There's no metric. There's you got to figure out your theory of change first before the metric becomes a meaningful thing to use. So I'm part of this kind of collective impact project in Jalan Besar, and they managed to pull together so many different diverse partners, like the ecosystems you build. And they started by saying, yes, we have to have shared measurement. But shared measurement of what? And then their theory of change, of course, there's a theory of change, but it's big and broad and abstract. And so it felt like, it's okay, we'll just do that first. But in order for any measurement really is the second order thing. The first thing you got to be clear about is what is your shared solution. And only with the shared solution, then your theory of change, the mechanisms behind the theory of change, then the metrics become meaningful, I guess.
Yeah. And maybe linked on to that question, I think there's a couple of questions from the audience that actually relates to more smaller, medium-sized outfits, non-profit outfits. And there's this question about that, impact reporting drains manpower resources. I think, Neera, you spoke earlier about, that whole resourcing part of the question when it comes to MEL. I guess, there seems to be a bit of a disparity between perhaps larger organizations that have, walked the journey a little more and have the capacity and the competency to be able to handle, right, the requirements, but smaller ones tend to struggle a little more. And I'm just thinking about the work that you're doing with grassroots organizations through the Rebuild India Fund. What are some of the insights from there that you can share with us?
I think the first thing is just a mindset, right? Although I was saying it takes a lot of resources, I think first and foremost it's a mindset. So even though you are small, you can still be disciplined about collecting information and engaging on impact measurement. A lot of the smaller organizations, believe it or not, even when we started Dasra to now, use registers, like these big books with like rows, and they still sit and draw like lines on them. Then they'll have all the kids, named. So I think collecting information, but actually pushing them to how can you use this information and what are you learning? No matter how small you are, once a month, once a quarter, push your team to sit down with these registers and say, what are we learning from it, right? And what might be a story? Like just walk around, to Vandana's point. It doesn't have to be just about the number at that point. It can be the learning of your own team, the learning of folks from the community, bringing them in. So I think just who are the range of stakeholders that you can engage with through that learning, but just that mindset and discipline, collecting that information is one thing, making meaning of that information is where I want to push organizations to be disciplined about. Yeah.
Thanks, Neera. And this next question is, I guess, open to anyone to answer. And again, earlier it connects with one of the topics in the threads that we were discussing, right? Which is that, funders perhaps are quite used to prescribing or, defining what the target audience is. And a couple of questions that actually relates to groups that perhaps are more underserved and perhaps neglected, right? How can they actually bring that into the conversation, into the focus, and how do they communicate that to funders in terms of these more underserved groups that they are trying to serve?
So I think it's important to have a clarity of mission and objectives, right? So if you're focusing on a particular beneficiary group or a target audience, right? It's important to know what you're trying to change, right? Before you can even start collecting any information or driving any meaningful change. But I think, to me, it comes back to taking the power back. I think Neera talked wonderfully about the power dynamic. We know that there's a power dynamic in this, right? There's a funder, and then there's an organization, and then there's a beneficiary. Obviously, there is a power dynamic here. But what continues to sometimes baffle me is that this sector cannot run without the best talent, right? Why do we undermine ourselves in terms of a talent? Why is what we do any less of an impact to society than, bankers or scientists or whatever? We're all a part of the society moving towards an ultimate impact, right? So take the power back. Don't undermine yourself. Be the expert. Look at the data. Make informed decisions, but make meaning out of the data. I'm a big believer. I loved when Neera said that, because data in itself doesn't give you anything. It is the insights that you get out of that data to be able to have a meaningful conversation that really drives change. And if you bring that expertise and you come with a few facts and figures and a few stories, I promise you the power balance will change. So, empower yourself, elevate yourself.
I think really trying to invest in underserved communities. So for example, we have organizations in Rebuild that really support minority religion organizations, as well as people from a lower caste. We recently launched an LGBTQ focused fund called the Pride Fund. And so I feel that some of it rests as a responsibility amongst those of us that are in privileged spaces, right? To really push for who are these communities that are underrepresented, and can we go there and be able to push money to move there is the first thing. But I think the second thing, more importantly, is how do we create spaces where there is greater representation?
Yeah.
And I think that responsibility and how one creates that safe space. So sometimes it ends up being tokenism, right? Like bringing somebody from the village that stands up here and is in a completely new place that gets showcased, and somehow that's representation. So I think we need to reimagine the spaces with which we bring their voice, their experiences, and sort of bridge that gap, that you can understand the lives that they're living and the vulnerabilities that these communities are facing. And I think that responsibility rests with us, but also with, if there is an us and them, to be able to shape that capacity. So we create these spaces that require English, right? At least in India, for sure. Sometimes we're underrepresenting the regional languages. Something gets lost sort of in translation, literally. But all the way from their experiences to board representation. I mean, think about the leadership on your team, think about who's on your board.
Yeah.
The more and more you can have lived experiences be able to show up, the more it will blend in to be kind of part of what we're all trying to do together.
Thanks for that, Neera. One more question, and this is for Justin, and then we'll have to wrap up this panel segment. There was quite a few questions actually on the interest of this whole value-centric discussion around MEL, and earlier you spoke about values inquiry. The question is around if you can give an example of how that looks like, and if one were to actually want to try it out, how would you take the next step?
We actually did a values inquiry exercise for people with disabilities when they are seeking employment. So the existing criteria was if you have job placement and job coaching, right? So of course everyone's going to count whether you got the job, how long you kept your job, what was your wage. Those measures actually were indicative of what the funders cared about, which is effectiveness and efficiency criteria. We actually went to the people with disabilities and asked them, what do you care about? We went to a job coach to ask them. Lots of other values came at play. So one was knowledge. Did the job coach explain to me the different options? And if I took this job, what's my career progression? Did I have choice? Did I have autonomy? Would there be respect at the workplace? Now, all these other criteria, if you put it into the existing job placement and job support services, which currently look quite good, would suddenly look quite bad. No, the job coach didn't give me a choice. It didn't explain this to me. They just asked me to show up for intervention. Now, that's an example of why the selection of the criteria matters. But it's actually a really painful project, because if you want to do this, you have to unpack what counts as inclusion at the workplace. And it's not an easy conversation. And even if you talk to the people where these things matter to them, they don't have the luxury of sitting around and coherently thinking about all these things. They would disagree with one another. Some would say inclusion means inclusion at all costs. Every space should be open to us. Others would think, no, slightly more kind of staged process. Yeah. So it is really painful, but it's doable. I guess that's an example.
Justin. Time is drawing, it's coming out quite quickly on us. And before we go, I just wanted to maybe turn to the panelists to share maybe what comes to mind in terms of a quick encouragement for folks in the room when it comes to leveling up their game in terms of impact measurement. Neera, shall we start with you?
Yeah, have fun. Don't take it so seriously.
It is a bit more serious mood today.
Yeah.
It's a bit unusual for Majurity Conversations.
I would say we're on a journey. We're all evolving together. So I think we need to share and learn and do this together.
Thanks.
I would say don't even invest in evaluation. Invest in solutions. If you have great solutions, sometimes they speak for themselves. You just do very light touch evaluations. If you have mediocre solutions, even if you put the most expensive, rigorous evaluations, you're not going to get anything interesting.
Thanks for that, Justin. And on that very slightly controversial note, please Thank our panel members, Neera, Vandana, Justin. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Justin.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you to all our panel speakers on sharing what impact and success can look like. So now get ready as we dive into our next panel on community-led impact. How can we design initiatives that truly empower people? So everyone, let's put our hands together for our panelists. We've got Xiao Yin Kwek, founder and lead change strategist at Common Ground Civic Center and Consultancy. We've also got Larry Young, executive director at Participate in Design. Please also welcome Professor Ijlal Naqvi, Associate Professor of Sociology and Associate Dean of Curriculum and Teaching at the School of Social Sciences at Singapore Management University. Joining them is Parnasha Banerjee, Director at Dasra. Welcome. And our moderator will be Cheryl Chung, Senior Director of Insights at Strategy, I beg your pardon, at the Majurity Trust. Welcome, Cheryl.
Great. Hi. Good morning, everyone. How's everybody doing? Okay. It was so funny when Neera was talking about impact measurement people as being very serious. So I lead the impact measurement team at the Majurity Trust. So I was thinking to myself, why are we so serious? And one kind of story immediately came to mind, and it's I don't know whether you've had this experience of this recurring dream where you wake up late, right? And then you have to go to an exam hall, and you're by yourself. And then you sit at the table, and you look at the paper, and it's a subject that you've not studied for, and you don't understand, right? I don't know whether this is like collective Singaporean PSLE PTSD, but it's sometimes impact measurement feels a bit like that, right? It's like we've ended up doing this test that we're not entirely sure why we're doing it and why the questions are phrased this way and so on. But the other experience that kind of comes to mind is that actually that format of test taking is quite, it's a bit sad, and I don't know, again, those of us who are from Singapore, you might have this experience where when PSLE season rolls by, usually there's one question that nobody can do, right? And then all the parents will send to all the adults, and then you'll be like, okay, I've got an advanced mathematics degree, I still can't do this 12-year-old exam, right? And to me, sometimes when I look at questions like that, I think to myself, this is a terrible exam question, but it's actually a really fun game. Like if we could all do it together, if we had a way of discussing and all that, actually we could very happily solve this problem quite joyfully. But me alone under stressful circumstances, in this exam hall, feels a little much lah. So this is to set the mood for the panel that we're about to have, which is on community-led impact. I promise you that my story has a point. Because we've put together this wonderful panel, of 4 wonderful guests, who are all friends of the Majurity Trust in different ways, friends and neighbors, I should say, some of you, near us at Foundry. And we wanted to talk a little bit about what community-led impact would look like, right? If we can solve these 2 problems, one is go a bit more upstream, don't be in this traumatic exam-taking environment. And secondly, how can we do it together? That's the kind of conversation we'd like to have. So Charlotte very generously introduced our panelists, so I'm not gonna introduce them again. But let's just get straight into the conversation, because we are running a little short on time. So maybe let me start off with Xiao Yin. So Xiao Yin and I have been friends for a long time, but we had this very fun experience last year where Xiao invited me to Common Ground to talk about impact measurement. And she had this beautiful framing for the conversation, which was around the mysteries of impact measurement. So this idea that there are almost irreconcilable tensions in the way that we think about this work, and it's actually important to open up that space to think about impact measurement in a more, and not to desire to resolve those tensions immediately. But Cheryl, I was just wondering if you would be able to maybe kick us off with a bit of a reflection on what community impact looks like to you, and tell us a little bit about your work. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. Well, this is the kind of topic that you can talk for a really long time on, and I know we have very limited time, so could we flash the slide? So rather than, oh dear, I'm so sorry, you can't see the Venn diagram. Okay, because I think diagrams sort of speak paragraphs. So if I had to share just one insight from all of the work that I have done, it would be this, that if you want good work to be done sustainably, you have to always work at the intersection of there's a funder, there's a practitioner, and there is quote-unquote community. To be more precise, it's a weird little subset of community you choose to work with. I say that because when I write community there, a great pushback I had from practitioners is, oh, so the funders and the practitioners don't see themselves as part of community then. And therein lies the problem, right? I love Charles Vogel's definition of community, which is it's just more than 2 or 3 people who share a mutual concern for each other's welfare. And that's the thing, does the funder and the practitioner share a mutual concern for each other's welfare? And do they also jointly share that mutual concern for the chosen community of impact? But sometimes when you hear the conversations we have in this space, it's oh, there's the community, and then there's us, which is not the best foundation of it. Right? But it's really important to work at the intersection because if you see all of the, when 2 connect but 1 is lost, okay, so a quick explanation of that. If a funder and a practitioner share the same values and priorities, but they left out the community, then what you get is a situation of we take community money to do community things that our community didn't ask for. And then we run the workshop and, oh, look, 0 participants. What the heck happened? But oh well, let's keep going, So, and that's not sustainable, right? The other permutation is when you have the funder and you have the community who all agree, we love this priority, we love this interest, but the practitioner doesn't show up for it because nobody consulted the practitioner on what is your philosophy, what do you see that works or doesn't work. So you have a situation where the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are done. We're not coming back. We are burnt out, we're underpaid, we love this, but now we are a real estate agent. Bye. And it's a joke, but it's also very serious, and it's very sorrowful for me as a practitioner to see that. And the third permutation is when, and this is more often than not, where you have a practitioner and a community who are hand in hand, priorities and values completely aligned, but the funders don't come along. They're this is not our thing. Because just because it's valued doesn't mean it gets funded. And it's not sustainable because what you get is the practitioner very often turns themselves into a funder. I will fund my own work that I believe in, which results in the worker gets done after a while because there's only so much personal funds I can spare on that. So that's a sorrowful thing for me. How do you work at that little intersection? I'll close this off with a simple, when I shared this Venn diagram to a bunch of non-profit leaders, I love the pushback they gave because they're if we just stared at this Venn diagram, we'd be so depressed we wouldn't want to continue the work anymore. But it made them think how would we redraw this diagram so that number one, we all see ourselves as part of the community and not this little subset thing. And how do we make sure that little tiny intersection point is bigger than all of these things? So I love that provocation, but this is my current best drawing of the reality that I'm dealing with.
Thanks so much, Sharon. I was at a charity event recently, and one of the conversations was on, the challenging economic headwinds and all this kind of thing. And the tone of the conversation was actually very competitive, right? It's the funding is very scarce, all of us have to compete. And I actually love that reframing of the way that we think about it. And of course, here we are all amongst friends, and would really love to dive deeper a little bit into what that community looks like. Okay, maybe Prashna, I can come to you. So welcome again to Singapore. We're so delighted to have you and the team here visiting with us today. One of the goals of this conversation is, of course, to also exchange ideas, So we'd really love to hear about your reflections, about the work that you do in India, as well as, of course, more specifically in Dasra, relating to community-led impact, and what does that look like to you?
Yeah, no, thank you. Thanks for having us here. And on behalf of Dasra, it's wonderful to be at Singapore. It's hard to follow the powerful panels and all the keynote that we saw, but I'll try to define it a little bit. I think for us, it's been a little bit of what you started with on seeing the intersection, but seeing the intersection in a lot more in action, right? So if you look at how we have seen community-led impact, it's always about relying on the strength, knowledge, and expertise that communities have had at a regional level and at a national level that kind of defines where philanthropic actions can be and where can, government, policy, national, state level can start defining their priorities to be, right? So if you think about what Neera shared in earlier in her keynote and a little bit about in the panel as well, that the panel, a lot of our alliances, a lot of the platforms that we have built in the past, 25 years, the past 10 years is all about how do we center community decisions and community knowledge to ensure that priorities of the national government, the state government, and philanthropic decisions are basically going to get set, right? If you look at the example of, when the entire National Clean Mission of India came, right, and this was back in, I think, 2004, that was one of the biggest clean mission one of the biggest clean mission programs that, a country had started globally. And it started with actually an infrastructure building priority, right? So a lot of it was building toilets, that how can we continue to build more toilets so that people have access. But a lot of us, and at Dasra, what we really did was that how do we ensure that what was the need of the community, where does community see access can be improved, and other ways in which we can facilitate that, right? And can that facilitate not what the government priorities start getting set up, but also in a way that it starts to talk about where philanthropic decisions can be taken. So the moment we get actually community voices into some of these platforms and, into some of these conversations, you realize that the shift starts to happen, right? You start to think that it's not just about infrastructure building, but it is about actually how do you strengthen governance mechanisms? How do you ensure that there's more community platforms and community models that can actually manage, sustain these infrastructure that's getting built, right? Or thirdly, I think it's also to figure that how do you actually make behavior change, make mindset shifts, right? And that is actually driven by the community. So for us, community-led impact can we be actually the facilitators to ensure that the community, the government, and philanthropy all are coming together, and that starts to shift decision making, and that starts to shift, action in a way that it allows for, change in the larger sector. And I think the other example that I think Neera spoke about as well earlier is really how we thought about the Rebuild India Fund, right? It started at the back of COVID. It started really where we thought that, there were a lot of organizations who were the frontline organizations who were looking at COVID action and COVID response. Can we actually see that there are ways in which we can kind of fund some of these organizations more institutionally? But that took a whole amount of time and whole amount of years for us to really trust our funders to say that you can actually come in and give into this fund that really talks to where the community thinks that their needs and their priorities are. So a lot of the funding is actually 100% of the funding is actually flexible, which means that the community organizations have the ability and the decision to take where they want to use the money. What it allows is, and if you look at the entire fund, and I think that's something that is very successful for us, is that 89% to 90% of these organizations are proximate leaders, which basically means that they are leaders from the community itself. So they know what their decision is, they know what the traditional wisdom is, and they know where they can use the funding, right? So we've been able to actually taking years to convince our funders to say that this is the way to give, this is the way to look at giving, and this is the way to look at philanthropy and philanthropy in action, right? So for us, a combination has been to what, she was earlier talking about, that where do you place community, but how can the community decision, knowledge, strength, expertise really,
really actually define what decision-making priorities could look like. And sadly, those where other decision-making priorities are policymakers, government, and philanthropy.
Yeah, and that's not easy. That's not a straightforward task. And I appreciate your candidness in saying that's actually also quite a long process. Yeah. Okay, maybe Larry, over to you. I think one of the things that's been really interesting about your work, and really, of course, followed your work a long time in, participatory design in the built environment, is that you've also been doing it long enough to evaluate, right? So I'm curious if you'll be able to share a little bit about the journey that you've taken, what you've learned in involving the community in some of these participatory design projects.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cheryl. Great to be here and learning from everyone. So I think for me, when it comes to community-led impact, over the years, of the 10 years, the work that I do, I think there are three things that I always see as a common characteristics, right, in terms of a community-led, what I define as a community-led impact. And I think the first thing is about capacity building, which I think a lot of us talk about knowledge building. And it's not just in terms of the community. I think like what Xiaoyan said, right? Community is not just the community you are working with, but it also involves, educating the funders, also educating the stakeholders, the decision makers. And I think that is very important because when you want to make a decision, it's a decision made together. So, we have to make people change mindsets. And sometimes mindset also start from, the funders themselves. How do I see the community? How do I see the practitioners that I'm working with? It's not just I made a decision for everything, but can we have a more collaborative platform? And I think all this will only work, right, for community-led impact to really work is if we have that mindset shift. And second thing also we observe is that, the methodology that we involve these people most of the time for community-led impact to really work really need to be accessible and inclusive. I think a lot of times you always think, a workshop setting or focus group discussion, one size fits all, right? We just get it done because, that's the easiest way to organize things. But sometimes, for example, if you're working with lower income communities, they may not have time to attend workshops. So how do we then meaningfully, try to engage them? And if we are doing a project that involves, let's say, shop owners, they may not have time to leave the shop to attend the workshop. So are we going to leave these voices out of it? No, right? But then how can we design a process that we can make sure these voices are heard as well? Because eventually the space will affect them, right? So how do we design for that process? And last but not least, I think this is a little bit difficult and a very difficult conversation, but it's a very real thing. It's about power sharing. How willing are we to actually share the power as funders, with our practitioners and also even community, and also for practitioners to share a bit of power, to not judge that, I'm the expert, I know it all, but be open-minded enough to know that, community has their wisdom as well. But let's take a step back and listen to them first, right, before we go back and discuss solutions. So these are the three things that I would say, community-led impact to me demonstrates. And happy to have a more discussion about that later as well.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, Larry. I really love what you said about also expanding our toolkit, actually, in terms of the different methods to engage. I think that's something that actually we don't really talk about, and we assume that if we go around with a hammer and, everything kind of falls into place, right? Which, of course, it doesn't. Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. So last but not least, we'll go to you, Ishnal. I think in a lot of your academic work, you've worked a lot on frameworks for citizen science and citizen social science and, looking at citizen leadership, that kind of thing. I think it will be really interesting for you to share a little bit about your work at SMU and how you've been working on community-led impact through your classes and your academic work as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Cheryl. When I was invited here on a panel on community impact, I wasn't quite sure why I was invited at the time. I don't necessarily do monitoring and evaluation, but I do learning. So when that part was brought home, I realized maybe that's what I'm supposed to contribute here. So I teach one course in particular at SMU that's called the Public Policy Task Force. Basically, we get 20 students. There's an outside partner who frames a problem for us and helps the students sort of study this thing. I teach it through qualitative methods. I'm primarily a qualitative researcher. And mostly what we've been studying is organizations who want to do community development. Essentially, you want the community to be able to help themselves at the end of whatever program that they're doing. We were particularly interested in the nature of participatory practices that were being deployed. And so you may know whether you've seen a ladder or a spectrum from inform to empower, something like that. But the framework that we took as a reference case, the ideal typical reference case, is called empowered participatory governance. And in it, ordinary people are brought in to undertake reasoned deliberation, and then empowered to take decisions at the end of it. That's the framework that these sort of cases were going to be measured against. And as I sort of plotted this out for the first time, a senior colleague came to me and I told her about this, and she says, that's great. You really need to internalize these processes in the class that you're teaching. And I thought, wow, that's fantastic. I've got to do that. So I told the students that we're going to do that, and there's only one small problem, which is that I've never done this. I have no clue what I'm doing. Students have no clue what they're doing. That's fantastic. We're going to work it out along the way, right? And that's part of the journey. The part that I could contribute with some rigor was the methodological analysis of qualitative work. So students basically went out, typically in groups, participant observation, interviewing, and they came back, and across a semester of 12 weeks-ish, they did basically about 40 fieldwork exercises of one type or the other. Then they've got to process this. So this is the making meaning out of the data that's being collected. So that's what they work through, and the course sort of has 3 stages, more or less. The first time they go out, they do something initially, they're like, oh, this is what's happening. The second time, we get a little bit better at it, the more memos are more precise, analytical, the questions that are coming out are more useful. And the third time, you've got to pull this all together into a report that our outside partner will receive and then sort of wrap up the project. But all of this, we talked about power sharing just a second ago. This becomes easier for me and the students if I simply tell them what to do, right? But that's no fun. So the whole point is that I don't tell them what to do. And they have to discover this through the learning. The making meaning out of it is the effort that they put in. And that's a particular feature of qualitative research, because when you collect qualitative data, you are the data instrument and thus the source of instrument error. So you must put yourself back into the work that you do so that people can understand the source of this error and your own position in doing that. And so the students had this process of confronting uncertainty through deliberation. And the course itself, those 20 students became a community, right? Became a mini public. And the thing that they were trying to see outside, they had to learn by doing it themselves. And I don't think the students or myself would have understood what an empowered process looked like unless we were doing it ourselves, because I didn't have that personal experience through my teaching and learning. They didn't have that experience through an exam-oriented sort of a framework. And sort of to wrap this up, like, what did I ask them at the end of it? I could add 2 questions to sort of the end-of-term feedback. And one of them was about qualitative learning, qualitative research, and yes, they learned this, they felt confident about that. The second was about a lifelong commitment to civic engagement and social responsibility in Singapore. So across the years that I've taught this, which is almost 10 years, 7 times, the average score is about 4.5 out of 5 on a sort of agree-disagree scale, right? So that students go through this process and they feel that commitment, the empowerment that they get through it. So let me just close with one thing, which actually ties back to Larry's work, that last semester I was teaching a course on collaborative governance, which has some of the same empowered participatory governance elements to it, although not internalized in this class. And when I got all the students to introduce themselves, say your name, say the kind of work you do, because this is a mid-career master's course, Masters in Sustainability. One of them says, I work on collaborative governance. And that's like, okay, that's a little unusual for this. So we chat afterwards, and he shares with me, he's actually one of the people who worked in Larry's participate in design. He shared some of the examples. I said, this is fantastic. And so he was my guest lecturer, which worked for me. The students absolutely loved it, and he shared all these great examples as well. And so it was a really wonderful way to sort of square the circle, bring the student back into teaching other students as well. So thank you, Larry, for enabling that.
Fantastic, and yeah, I love that little connection that we have in the panel. We've talked a lot about, and collectively you have a lot of experience in working in community-led impact, and a lot of very positive case studies, learning and kind of learnings. And I'm curious, as you reflect back in the various projects that you've done, what are some of the frictions, actually? I know we've alluded briefly to them, but what are some of the frictions in doing this? And if you had to advise people who are coming into this work, what are the things that you will have to look out for to kind of not go down the same path of learning journey, if that makes sense? We'll open it up to anybody who wants to feel so inclined to respond first. Staring. Thanks, Xiao.
No, I think maybe the friction I'll share is It's really, really hard to do meaningful work if we're not willing to tell the truth of what's going on to each other. And there's a lot of really, really hard, not very fun truths to share with each other when it comes to doing impact work. You know, we all show up for the glamour of the impact work, right? Like everybody wants to hear the flowers and the fruits version of it. Nobody wants to hear the down in the dirt version, right? Like we're still trying to fertilize the soil, you know, like come back in 20 years for the fruit part. There are hard truths, like, you know, it's easy to say, like, we need a long time to measure this. But like, hard truths are like, do I trust you over this period of time? You know, why is it that I don't trust you, you know, as a funder? Why don't I trust you as a practitioner? So, I mean, I think a trust relationship is one where we're both willing to share the truth with each other and also willing to listen to the truth. Like if I tell you, you want to lower, let's say, poverty in a particular neighborhood, it's going to take 20 years. You know, are you willing to stay here 20 years with me as we figure it out, and maybe we don't have the magic solution in year 1 to 5? Are you going to be okay with that? Like some practitioners can't even have that conversation with your funder. You know, so if truth is not put on the table, then how do I even know whether I share this mutual concern with you? You know, so it's very hard for me to commune with you, to be a community with you, if I can't even tell you the truth of like how hard this work is. Yeah, from the funder and the practitioner side and the receiving community side.
I mean, I think I'll be honest, we start the conversation by saying we all need to come together, we all need to collaborate, we all need to talk to each other. That is the hardest thing to do, especially for people who are trying to get people together and facilitate, right? Yeah. So when you say that we put the truth on the table, it's to have people aligned to the truth on the table, right? So it's like we've worked in many of our collaboratives or alliances that we worked with around in sanitation and adolescence, in climate resilience, now in migrant workers, and the single hardest thing has been, can decision makers really align with each other? It includes funders, it includes the government or those who are going to take decisions from a priority point of view, and in how it's going to scale, and does that align with where the community needs and their priorities are, right? And for us, as someone who tries to build this consensus, getting people to collaborate, seeing the collectivization, seeing how the collectivization will really impact the sector, it's been the single most hardest thing to do. And we often talk about it at Dasra that it requires special talent, it requires people with extreme resilience, extreme understanding, and really thinking that this is a long-term game that you are in, and you will, on a day-to-day basis, it will really look like you following up with each of these people to being like, please can we align, please can we respond, and then 5 years down the line, you will see a policy coming out, which includes all of these indicators. You will see philanthropy change the way it kind of funds. You will see that community needs are actually being placed in how they fund and in how, government has actually also put in their public resources. That's been the game changer for us. So it's about really thinking about that it's a long-term game, and it's about consistent collaboration, consistent consensus building, and consistent getting people together, building that community, and really seeing that what can the community move towards as a collective and not as individual players, right? And I think that's been one of the hardest things that we've seen where the friction has most been.
Great, thanks so much. Either Larry or Victor.
So collaborative and participatory processes are really messy and sometimes inefficient. And students don't like this. Sometimes they just want to be told, like, I will do this thing, and in week 13 we have an exam, and they're like, everybody, yes, okay, right? So confronting uncertainty is a kind of personal quality that we all need to build through practice. And trust in each other in order to be able to do that is something that we can learn, and one of the best ways to learn is to do something really difficult together.
Yeah, I just wanted to build on that point. I think it's not just students. I think funders as well, stakeholders as well. Every time when, especially the early days when the concept of participatory design or even community-focused design came up, everybody told me, I need a clear outcome. What are you going to achieve at the end of the day, right? And that is the hardest thing to actually talk about, right? When you talk about participatory process. So I think, again, the education part comes in, right? We need to educate one another that things may change along the way, and we need to be flexible. I think earlier on, we talked about flexibility, to be able to kind of be flexible, to kind of change outcomes. I think that is very important. And usually, that's the education part that usually causes conflicts. And more to be done, definitely.
I'm curious as to, just to riff off your earlier point, right, about actually getting that alignment is a specific skill, and what does that look like? I know Xiao's Venn diagram. I always say, everything looks great on a slide, and then in the real world, trying to get this Venn diagram to align is chaos, right? But I'd be really curious as to what that alignment looks like in your work, and if there's a specific example of how you managed to, I'm going to say, solve the alignment problem, or at least get closer to a solution with that alignment. I imagine that's something that we all struggle with.
Yeah, I can start off. I think for us, it's literally been a very strong backbone organization or a strong facilitator that is able to actually bring these people together. A very, very strong governance mechanism, right? Who takes the decision? Who is the decision for? What role each of these players are going to play in taking these decisions? And where do you veto, right? Sometimes you will not align on things, and therefore you need to understand the one common ground of where can we kind of get the maximum out of all of these three stakeholders or many that we kind of work with. And I think the last part of this is that, is it really trying to solve for impact at scale? And that is what we have seen people align on a lot, right? If we think, and an example of this has been that during COVID, when we were actually really thinking about who are the frontline workers and how can we define frontline workers a lot more, a large part of the work that we have done within sanitation, in our sanitation portfolio, the first thing that came through is that, we're talking about frontline workers, but those who are collecting our waste are not even in the conversation, are not even part of the entire frontline conversation, right? So are there ways, while our priorities were different, while government priorities were different, philanthropic priorities were different, we as Dasra came together to really think about how do we become that backbone organization, facilitate in a way that it really brings sanitation workers or waste pickers and waste collectors as important frontline workers, and can they be recognized with this kind of a, so to say, recognition, right? And can there be policies, and can there be benefits, can there be schemes that one can start thinking about placing in the sector that allows this to move, right? That actually led to, our country's one of the biggest schemes around protecting sanitation workers' safety, right? We call it Namaste at a central level, and that really talks about, can we give equal wages, equal benefits to some of these workers? And that showed replication in almost about 10 states in India, that, we could do it even at a local and at a regional level. And what followed was even better, is that because of this alignment and because of this, need for the sector, and the fact that there was a strong backbone organization like ours, even if it sounds a bit gloating, I'm still going to say it, that it was a little bit because that we did a lot of this facilitation to be able to ensure that philanthropy money also started to move in that direction. So for the longest time, foundations like the Gates Foundation or even, USAID, etc., were funding infrastructure in India, right? Or were funding service delivery in India without recognizing the need for actually having frontline workers or sanitation workers. So for them to start funding in that mechanism, or to see that, our resources can move in that direction as well. And that allows us to really see this group as not just those who are on the outside or in the periphery, but actually are in the decision making and the accountability priorities of the government as well as of the philanthropic decisions. So for us, that's actually been that example. So 2 to 3 things, right? Like I said earlier, it was about, can we actually play a facilitating role? Can the government and the funders take a step back and listen to where the need is? And we thought that time the frontline and recognizing them as frontline people was the need. Can you look at impact at scale? Can it actually move in a direction that, it's just not at one siloed way, but can it start looking at a local level, and can it start replicating itself at a regional level as well?
Fantastic, thanks so much. Any quick other responses on the alignment question? Because it's something that's come up a lot on the Q&A.
Yeah, I can share. If you want to boil it down to a personality trait, we talk about collaboration and all that, right? if you look it up, you can see like there's a conflict management model, right? Called whatever, I forget the name right now. But basically, there is assertiveness and cooperativeness. And why collaboration is so incredibly difficult to get is collaboration is the product of someone who has high assertiveness and high cooperativeness. Two very different styles of negotiating with people. But anyone who is able to do that high collaboration and high assertive, all of the other versions of negotiation are available for you. I can compete, I can accommodate, I can do all of this stuff because I know how to do that stuff. But when you work with practitioners and funders and all that, you see everyone is on this spectrum of like, if I am over cooperative with you as a funder, I'm not going to tell you, the practitioner, that, you know what, I think you're wasting my money, right? Okay, because sometimes that's the hard truth to say. Or a practitioner who is over assertive, may be like overly like self-righteous and grandiose about my method, only my method works, and all of the other practitioners out there suck, right? So collaboration is not an easy thing. And if I had to boil it down to a learnable, trainable skill, is you have to teach people, how do I be assertive in expressing what is in my interests and in my priorities, and at the same time, how do I cooperate, which is to show a lot of interest in another person's priorities and another person's interests. It's a teachable skill. It's not a personality trait. Personality is just the sum total of habits that we have got to up to this stage, and you can learn new habits.
Yeah. Great, thanks so much.
I think for me, I hear a lot about collaborations, right? But sometimes what I've learned as well is that sometimes don't force that collaboration. It just simply means that it's not the right time to collaborate. And it is okay. And I think sometimes as a practitioner or something, even though the thing is very attractive, there's a lot of money, a lot of funding, but the values are not aligned, my advice is really don't take it up. Because you may take it up and end up down the road, it will just end up very ugly. And we have learned that before, right? Where we take up the project and end up, the value were very misaligned. Because, like what Shawin has said, right? I mean, assertiveness and cooperativeness, we are all on very different spectrums. And it didn't end well. So I would say, spend a bit more time to really facilitate a conversation. Evaluate, are we aligned? Are there even possibilities for us to be aligned? Do they actually show that they're willing to be cooperative? I think we need to take the courage as leaders sometimes to make that effort to understand that the ground foundation in order for community-led impact really to go the long run to be implementable. Yeah.
Fantastic. Maybe last word for you, Ishla?
Yeah, I wanted to share the story. Like in my class, I forced that collaboration. It's like, hey kids, you got 2 weeks left till your report is due. Guess what? You're answering these 3 questions. But the best instance where it ever occurred was there was just a quirk of scheduling where I couldn't make the scheduled class time. And so, but I had done a makeup class, but still we hadn't made enough progress. So I couldn't be there. So I said, here's the classroom. You have 9 until 12 o'clock. Here are the 3 things you have to accomplish. You've done all the work that leads you up to this stage. I know you have all of this capacity. Bye-bye. And they simply had to do it, but that was less generous than in your approach.
All the educators in the room is like, I need to do that. On that wonderful note, please join me in thanking the panel for this wonderful discussion on community-led impact. Thank you very much, everyone.